So, hello and welcome back to my C++ tutorial playlist. In this video, we will take a look at how to use Git and GitHub. And if we have time for it, we will also configure GitHub Actions for CI/CD. So this is the application that we left off with last time. I did some styling off screen so it looks better, and the functionality is still the same. We can add description here and can add objectives, can remove objectives, and can select a quest category. So something like this, we can mark it as complete, then it gets green, and we can also delete it again. So a very simple to-do app, but in the theme of a quest tracker that you might be familiar with from games. Let's close this out. And there's one thing I wanted to change, which is, as you can see here, this application is still called Hello World project. So let's go out here and rename this to Quest Tracker. And that seems to be more fitting. What we need to do is to create a GitHub account. I have already a GitHub account, but if you don't, then you need to have a GitHub account and then sign into that. And if you did that, then you can create a new repository here. So let's create a new repository, and I will call this Quest Tracker, something like this. Let's make it public from the beginning. And we don't want to add anything. We don't want to add a README file or an ignore file. And we also don't want to set a license and create a repository. And then we already get the instructions on how to create a new repository and push that to GitHub. So we can follow that. Move this to the side a little bit. First of all, we need to install Git. If we don't have it installed yet, let's see, we already have it installed. But if you don't, then you can do sudo pacman-s yyU git, and then it will upgrade the system and also install Git for us. So that can take a while because I haven't done that in a while. So after all that is finally done, then we should have the newest version of Git, and then we can navigate to our documents and then our quest tracker. And this should become our new repository. So we've now created a new Git repository, and we can see that by the Git directory that has been created here. One of the first things that we want to do, as we can see, we have now version control here, but one of the first things that we want to do is create a new file, and that is a git ignore file. And here we list everything that we don't want to track, and this would be the cache and also the build directory, and I think that's it. So as you can see, this went down significantly from over 1000 entries to only 13 that we want to track. So let's close this here again. And then with the git add command, we can stage all the files that we want to version into the staging directory. We can take a look here for all the untracked files we have, and these are the ones that are untracked, and we can start to track all of them if we supply the dot. And if we check again, then you can see here changes to be committed. Those are now the changes we have in our staging area that are not yet committed. And then to commit all of them, we can use this command here. And here we can write any comment that we want. And this is the first time I'm using Git here. So we can configure our email and username here. So that would be David Turks, the username. This would be Arnie Bucks, like so. And now we can rerun our commit command. And now we have committed all of these changes to our local repository. And this are the commands that we need to run to add a remote repository, and then also push our local repository changes to this repository. So let's do that. So first of all, we switch to the main branch, or create the main branch. And then we want to add a remote origin. And then let's try to push. And then we need to log in here. And here, this is not the password, but we need to have an authentication key here. And we can paste that in here. And then our changes have been pushed to GitHub, as you can see here. Now we can close out of this here. A more convenient way to work with Git is basically this tab here. And here we have a version history and so on. So let's change something. Let's edit the README file. This is a simple to-do that will be used as an example in my videos. So something like this. And now you can see we have one change. And if we put something in here, we can automatically commit this and also push it. So let's see how that works. And it asks us if we want to stage our changes automatically, and we want to say always. And then sync changes is basically a push. We have more options here that we can do. Basically all the commands are available to us here. But in this case, we just want to push. Okay, and don't show again. And then we want to allow that. And then we need to sign in here. And then everything is configured here, and we have pushed now using Visual Studio Code. And then we will have this simple README now. So, and if there are any changes that would be added here and we want to check them out, then we would have to run a pull. Let's see how that is possible here. Then we would run a pull like this, and then we would get all the changes from our remote repository. And basically you've seen how we can do a push and stage our changes here. And this is basically already all the most basic commands that we need. We can also list all the staging files. Basically, the files that are listed here are often, I think this is the staging area. We can list all the stage files with this. Then we can, of course, also remove files with git remove, and then we would supply a file here. Then we can also rename a file. Yeah, I don't have any example right here. But we could, for example, add some more text here, like this. And then when we save it, this will be added here. And we could, again, git add README. So then we can see here our stage changes. And then we could, for example, if staged, then we can get a diff of the staged and what would change if we commit the things that we have in the staged stage. Then we can, of course, show all of our commits in the git log. There we can see all of our commits and browse through them. For example, this one, let's copy this, copy. And then we can inspect it further with git show. Yes, and this basically opens less, and then we can inspect all of these changes. Also, if we're not satisfied with something, we can remove this from the staging, and then we can reword our changes like so. Then all of our changes would be reverted. And also one last thing that is really helpful is when we have a lot of unstaged files, then we can do clean FD, which would remove all the unversioned files like our build and cache and so on. So we can have the same code, exactly the same code as the remote repository again. And this sometimes fixes some build issues and so on. So we can just confirm that it's not an issue on our side. And yes, that's so much for Git. So let's add some actions, basically to maybe run tests for us and also build the application for us and so on. So there are some things that are suggested to us. We can also browse here. We can also write them from scratch, but I often start with something that is suggested. And in this case, we want to have a CMake based multi-platform project. So let's hit configure. And then we can name this something, build our project, or build the to-do quest tracker. We can remove this comment. our branch is the main branch, that is correct. And also on pull requests, that makes sense. Then the matrix OS. Okay, compiler here would be Clang CL, also Clang CL, Ubuntu, also Clang and Clang++. Okay, this is just called Clang maybe. Let's see. Maybe let's leave it to a default so I don't mess anything up and just check if it works. And here we can have our own configure command. Basically, we don't need this anymore because we have a preset. And this would be the, let's call this a GitHub preset. In here, we want to have it set up like this maybe. Clang++, and I'm not sure if Clang CL or whatever, but let's see. Use strings, then configure CMake. Let's create a preset that's called GitHub. Then the build here, and yeah, we don't need to specify that. Let's call this default. Or yeah, default at first to see if it works, and afterwards we will create a GitHub one, and then test. We only need to run ctest, so that works. Let's clean this up a little bit and remove the comments so it's a little bit more dense and tidy. Like that. And then we can extend this and add a cache or upload a build artifact. We can do that and just copy this. Then we go to a new line, paste all of this. Now we need to use the right indentation, and let's give this job a new name. Let's call this upload and indented. I think this needs to be the same indentation as this. The syntax here is a little bit proprietary, so I'm also just playing around with it a little bit. And these are all optional, so remove them. So, and let's commit this and see if it works at all. And if not, probably not, then we will need to do some fixes here, and we can always inspect it here and see how the status is. Then we can also later on configure webhooks so we can send updates to Discord or so on. And I will show that also. First of all, let's see if it works at all. So this didn't work. SDL could not find X11 Wayland Development System. Okay, that is okay. We just forgot to install these. Let's check out how our Windows build goes. So it looks like our Windows build was successful, but our Ubuntu was missing some dependencies. So we still need to install them. And we can check the dependencies out here. And yes, so we need to add them. So let's go out of here. Press tracker. Let's see if any tags were created or so on. So nothing yet. Okay, that is something we also want to do, is to automatically create tags if they're not existent yet, and also upload the build artifacts correctly. So let's go ahead and create another thing so that let's check out the reusable strings. And then before some of that, we need to, of course, we need to edit this file. And somewhere in here, I would like to install the dependencies. And let's see. And the shell would be also a bash shell. Run this. Like so. So our build is now finally complete, but now we get an error here that the resource is not accessible by integration, and that happens if we don't have the correct permissions. And to fix that, we need to go into settings and then actions, then general, and then there is workflow permissions, and we need to have read and write permission. And we also would like to have this maybe for the future, maybe not. Like so. Then we can go back to actions, then over here, and then we can rerun this job. And now we finally created a release. And if we check now out our repository, then we can see Quest Tracker version 5 was now created because it was the run 5. Then we have the font that was used, then the Quest Tracker exe and Quest Tracker elf file, and we can download this now and run it. We should be able to mark it as executable, or maybe not. Terminal, and then we should be able to run it. And of course it could not load the font, so we also need to have this, and basically we need to clean this up a little bit for the future, but for now let's give this a bin directory and put the Quest Tracker in here, and then also create a res folder and put in this in here. And now if we run it, then it works, you can see. So we need to clean up the release a little bit, but yeah, as we can see, we have a change log here and so on and so forth, and a release. So the last thing that I wanted to do is to create a webhook for GitHub, for Discord. And for that, we can go into here, into webhooks, and then add a webhook here. And in Discord, we can create webhooks. Let's open this here. Discord.com and open in browser. So in here on my server on Discord, I have a channel with where all the stuff gets sent, and here we have integration and then a webhooks. Here we can create new webhook, but I will just use the old one. And we can just paste it into here and then append GitHub here at the end. And we need to change the type to application.json and then send me everything, or let me select individual events. And in this case, I want to get new releases maybe, or just send me everything and then add this webhook. And then whenever we do something, so first of all, we need to pull now, so we get all the changes that we did to our workflow. As we can see, we now have our workflow also in our Visual Studio Code environment. So we can push something like this and then test webhook. And when we commit this, then we can take a look at, first of all, our webhooks should now be running, our actions should now be running again, and our webhook should have sent the first event. And as we can see, we have sent our first event to Discord now, and we should now receive updates once these are finished and a new release was built. And this was already it for the basics. I will now clean some things up to make the releases runnable by default and so on, but this was everything I wanted to show you in this video. So thank you very much for watching, and with that, see you in the next video.